just to say a tiny bit about GameShift. We are a thinking partner consultancy. We're about 20 people, and the bit that I do need to say with due modesty, but we are very proud of it, is that for the last 5 years we've been ranked by the Financial Times as one of the UK's leading consultancies. And really, being strategic and working strategically is at the heart of what we do with clients, whether it's around strategy processes themselves, change, transformation, leadership, but we always act as a thinking partner. So thinking strategically, this is really at the heart of what we do, and it's something very close to our hearts. Brian.
Yes, thank you very much. Good afternoon, everyone, or morning, depending on where you are. But I'm Brian Mooney. I founded a small consultancy practice, Effectus Research, 12 years ago, specializing in strategy support to organizations around the world. I spent my career working in strategy, the privilege of working with some very famous thought-leading strategists like C.K. Prahalad and Gary Hamel and some others, and they helped shape my view on strategy and sort of seeded a lifelong interest in it. And when I started to discover GameShift, I also found, I think, some soulmates there, people that were also very interested in strategy. And I think the style of GameShift matches our style in terms of we like to engage with our clients in a thinking process and go deep on the human side of things. So I think you're going to hear more about that today. Chris, you said why this event? And
well, do you know, Brian, it was great. You know, as we were talking about why we wanted to do this event, you particularly, I remember, thought there was a problem with a lot of the strategy conversation ended up being about tools, there being 1,000 tools and not much wisdom. And I just thought it'd be really good if we could replay some of that conversation here.
Yeah, of course.
Yeah.
I'll get in my soapbox then for a few minutes.
All right. If your soapbox too long, I'll stop you.
All right, fair enough.
Yeah.
No, look, I think the fundamental problem is I've been doing strategy, and I'm sure many people on the call have been doing strategy, involved in it in one way or another for quite a few years. And if I'm really honest, I don't think people's practice of it has improved that much. Particularly, I don't think people have become more confident in strategy and really saying, I'm a master of strategy. I know what it's about. I can not only define it, but I can practice it, and you know, I have success with it. And that is despite a huge amount of writing on strategy and publications and debates. I'm sure we're all on LinkedIn. I mean, in my feed every day, I must have a post about, you know, what is strategy, and strategy implementation is more important than strategic thinking, blah, blah, blah. And I think a lot of this stuff, this noise about strategy isn't really that helpful. It just seems to be the old chestnut discussions kind of going on and on and on, as am I, but give me another minute, Chris. I think the interesting thing, if you look at certainly the literature, and it was interesting, a couple of years ago, there was a book by BCG called Your Strategy Needs a Strategy. So we had this even huge inflation of the number of tools that are available for strategy. Just to give you a quick glimpse at their analysis, if you don't mind, I'll try and quickly share my screen. Let me do that, share screen. And you see this slide?
Yes.
You know, a mountain of strategy tools being sort of churned out by all kinds of different practitioners and consultancies, particularly on strategy. And as I say, I don't think that that has led to a huge amount of improvement in practice. I think the other thing is that certainly strategy is a popular topic, but it's been, if I may say, dumbed down quite a lot, or equated simply with productivity. I see a lot of stuff about how to be more strategic, define your goals, think long term, and that's it. And look, that's part of the story, but it's not the whole story about how you be strategic, particularly in a company or a business context. There's more to it. So there's a lot of these kinds of simplistic approaches, either or kind of approaches. Strategy is planning or implementation. And I think what we need is more of a kind of rounded view on it. What is the whole thing, and how do we think about it as individuals, me, you, as strategists, our teams, and our businesses as a whole, and try and figure out how we can improve on those different levels.
I really like that 3-level analysis you bring. The strategy as an individual thing, strategy as a team thing, strategy as an organization thing. And one of the things I really want us to explore is whether there is such a thing as a strategic organization and a strategic team, or whether it is always about just individual people thinking strategically and being strategic. And I wonder, Philippa, I'm sure you have a reaction to all of this, because Philippa, I have to tell you, is largely allergic to tools and more interested in strategic practice. So.
Well, thank you for naming that very publicly, but I think that's absolutely true. I think from my point of view, and originally I started in strategy as a Big Four junior consultant. I think for me, over the years, I have found that the word strategy has been used really loosely to mean something important. You never just have a job, you have a strategic job. I'm strategically there. It's a strategic transformation. And I've discovered that actually strategic often just means something very important. So what I'm really interested in is, okay, so what do we actually do in practice to make a difference, to actually bring about something that will help the organization move forward? And I think that is an interesting point about, can you have a strategic team, or is it, as Chris said, made up of strategic individuals, or perhaps at least, and we'll come on to talk about this because we have we'd like to invite your views on it, but perhaps it's some of the skills of thinking strategically that will enable a team to better think together strategically, and therefore to look into the organization. So I think, Chris, if that helps, that's sort of where my thinking starts around that.
Yeah. Now, Brian, I wonder, is this a good moment for you to show your 3x3 diagram? Because I know you think it's not just about thinking strategically, is it? You want something broader than that.
I know I'm probably going to contradict myself after showing a slide where I was complaining about the volume of strategy frameworks. Here's another one, right? But nevertheless, this is more a kind of mapping of where I mentioned that kind of whole view of strategy or being strategic. So bear with me, I'm not going to go over all the bullet points, but if you look at this, what we're trying to say is...
Brian, sorry to interrupt. Could you just make it slideshow so that the words are slightly easier to read? Is it possible to go from current slide?
I have a little issue with my screen actually when I
in that case, just carry on. Sorry.
Yeah, I'll try and how's that?
That's better. Much better.
That's good. Yeah,
much better.
Okay.
Thank you.
Two major dimensions: process and people. Today we're going to talk about people, and within people, 3 levels: individuals, you and I, teams, small groups of people, organizations, large groups of people. And then we'll look at going up the way. As Chris said, it's not only about thinking, it's about planning, and it's about implementation or execution, if you prefer. And as I said in my opening comments, there's so much debate about which one of these it is, or which one is more important. And the view is, well, they're all important, right? And the trick, if you like, is working out, how does the individual think, plan, and implement? How does the team think, plan, implement? How does the organization think, plan, implement? And there's lots of bullets there. We'll share this slide afterwards. But today we're going to try and talk about that people dimension, people factors. How does individual thinking, individual planning, and so on, how do we make that work in the context of the other things? We hopefully have another event in the series later on to talk about the process dimension.
Fantastic. Thank you, Brian. So I think that might bring us to actually digging into some of the substance of this, and particularly getting people to join in. So Rick, the Mentimeter is ready to go, isn't it? People just click the link now. So what we like to do is to tackle this first question of being strategic at an individual level. And on the Mentimeter, we've got a question which is, what are the characteristics of the most strategic people you know? So if you have a click on the link, you get a chance to put 3 words in. We should see a word cloud generate miraculously on the screen that Richard's going to share.
I think it's worth reflecting, yeah, on that and the people.
Now, so far, we've only got 3 people have joined in, so there's plenty more to come, I suspect.
And if you have any problems, please shout Richard, and he will, as if by magic, sort out whatever your problem is.
Probably only if it's related to Mentimeter, probably.
Oh yeah, sorry, I beg your So if you can't get on it, I see that Lena's got an issue getting onto it. We have done this where 300 people at a time went straight onto it, which was a bit of a sort of hold your breath moment, but it did work. So
we're optimistic.
We're very optimistic.
So, as this is coming in, Philippa, maybe you could start us off by, I mean, either commenting on what you're seeing on the screen or commenting on what you're not seeing. I mean, you know, how do you answer the question?
I think for me, I'm interested that actually curious is one of the, it's not the biggest word. I see the creative is, and I might come back to that in a moment. I think for me, curiosity is something that's really important in, you know, in the most strategic people I know, if I think about it. I think one of the risks is that sometimes people think they have to know all the answers. You know, I'm a strategic leader, I'm a strategic person, strategic thinker, I have to know all the answers. Rick, can you just look at the message? Susie's just asking if you can share the link again. Thanks. I think there's, for me, it's all about, you know, asking good questions. So curiosity is really helpful. And I really like this. In fact, curious, creative, and analytical. I'm really pleased about that, because often, I think it's actually not so often that we see creative as being such a an important part of the strategic makeup, if you like, of individuals, because often it's thought about that it's about actually needing to be very analytical. And quite often what we find with clients is that there's the tension, and it's not that either or is better. I think it's about actually being really noticing when you're being very analytical, and noticing when that's helping, noticing when it's not helping, and equally noticing when you are being creative or need to be creative, and just thinking about, so when is it most helpful? But for me, if somebody ever asked me, you know, I'm being promoted into a strategic position, I'm really nervous about it. I remember one coaching client, and she said, I'm really nervous about it because I don't know all the answers. You know, and we then explored actually why she felt she needed to know the answers, but actually it was much more about being able to ask good questions. So I'm really delighted that Curious comes up so strongly.
Brian.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, it's really interesting to see these words. It's not surprising, I suppose, the curious and creative, definitely the kind of genesis aspect of a strategy, where the initial thoughts come from, and inspiration. Is the word learning there somewhere? Maybe I'm just studying it, maybe not, but that might be another similar word. I'm actually really pleased to see analytical as well, because as I was saying, this 3 levels of thinking, planning, implementing, maybe the analytical part is more toward the planning and implementing. Maybe also I could think on the thinking part, it's important. What I'm a little bit surprised to see is they are predominantly, could I say, I don't want to say intellectual, but cognitive type words. I would maybe just be interested to know what folks, if you thought about a person that you've met and either been on your team or been in your life somewhere that you would say they are strategic. Think about who that is and what was, what was the defining thing about them that made you think that?
Just going back to your point, Brian, about the learning, I see there's reflective and self-reflection coming up, which I think responds to your question about learning.
Learning, yeah.
I
think just to, answer my own question, or to give you a little insight into my life, a lot of the people, I was thinking about this question prior to the event, and certainly strategic people I've met have many of those characteristics for sure. I've also think that they tend to have other kind of more individual personality types. And again, this might be entirely biased toward the people I've worked with, but they tend to be good at games, right? They like playing games. I think one person I've particularly got in mind is a bit of a playing cards and dominoes aficionado. And they usually like traveling a lot, right? There's something about traveling that unlocks something for strategic people, and they tend to be very interested in what's going on in the world. So they don't, it's not very local, they have a kind of global view.
And I think we see that quite a few times. It's got open-minded and holistic.
Definitely.
Several times there.
Definitely. They also, I've found them quite pro-risk, right? They like taking a punt quite a lot of the time. It's something about risk-taking. Maybe it's testing themselves, perhaps. And I must say, the people I have in mind are not necessarily bookish people. I'm maybe more of a bookish type, as you can see behind me, but a lot of the people, I think in one person in particular, dyslexic, probably not read any strategy books, but very, very strategic. So it's not about how many books you've read or degrees you have or companies you've worked in. I think it's about the things we're seeing on the screen here, which are much more about the way your brain is wired, or the way you've made your brain wired, and some aspects of personality.
And I think also the other thing that for me is not here, but perhaps again it links to the curiosity, is I don't see anything, and perhaps it's because of Mentimeter and sort of not wanting to use two words, but I would say actually quite often strategic people, they test assumptions, or they're kind of rigorous about assumptions, or being curious about assumptions. So why do we make widgets in this way? Why have we always done it this way? Why do we always assume we're based in Europe, not anywhere else? Why do we assume that we will always be the market leader? So I think there's lots of
power, Philippa, isn't there? Just in that, I've noticed in what you're saying, every one of those sentences started with why.
Yes, and I guess that's the kind of the being curious about, coming back to, but one particular aspect of it, about being curious about assumptions we are making. If I think back to a client that we worked with that shall remain nameless a number of years ago, really big client, pharmaceutical client, leader in its field around the particular drug that it had patented. And actually the following week, by complete coincidence, we were working, they were the market leaders, absolutely, and they believed they would remain the market leaders. It was clear from the conversations they were having. A week later, by complete chance, we were working with a very small kind of pharmaceutical company that was a disruptor, if you like, and they were actively talking about this particular organization and how they wanted to take their slot in the market. And the big pharmaceutical company the previous week hadn't thought about it at all. So in terms of, I know I've moved on to organizations, but in terms of actually people thinking strategically, I think being strategic around assumptions can be really, really helpful.
Yeah, well, that brings me to a word that's not here, that just you made me think about it in relation to that story, which is humility.
Yes.
Maybe there's something in being strategist about knowing what you don't know and being curious about what you're almost certain to miss.
Yeah.
Definitely true, Chris. I wonder, I see one there I've never heard before, transgressive curiosity. Maybe there's someone on the call who want to admit to that one and tell us about it?
No, that's me, Brian, I'm afraid.
Oh.
Sorry. No, I mean, I just think there is something in strategy about being prepared to step over various sacred lines. You know, unless you're willing to transgress, you're stuck in the 2x2 matrix. You're stuck in the corporate story. So there has to be an element of transgression possible for the curiosity to work or for the open mind to be effective. Because unless you're willing to transgress, your openness is always in one little box.
Yeah.
And Chris, we're going to keep these these pictures, aren't we, and be able to share them with people.
Yeah. Richard is nodding, so that's a good sign.
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah, and that's a classic, actually, Chris, of the kind of a bit of the heretic in the strategist, perhaps, or a bit of the anti-orthodox,
yeah.
maybe.
So, all right, so the two of you, it'd be really good if we invited people just to speak, I think, for a moment.
Yeah, Rick, can you take the oh, yeah. That's a good word, Vanessa. I really like that. Cage rattlers. I love that. Yeah. Could you just say a little bit more about why, either what prompted it or your experience that's led to putting cage rattler? I absolutely love that as a phrase. I might steal it, I'm afraid.
I think in my experience actually globally, the clients that I've worked with that have been the most successful is that they are just wanting to challenge what's existing, what's believed. It goes to the points that you were saying about just not settling for what is, looking for the future. And letting that unfold and engaging people in that. So it's not just individuals, it's letting all parts of the organization contribute to the strategy.
I really like that.
It'd be great to hear just comments on this first section from a few more people who want to join in. So if you could either put your hand up or indeed just speak. By the way, I also love cage rattlers, and if nothing else, it'd make a great name for a craft cider.
And there is another example of lateral thinking, Chris, what you've just done.
Oh, Kay Nash has got something here in the...
You want to say that, Kay?
Let me put my video on. Hi, everybody. I've just astonished myself. That's why I prefer not to join these things live. Having practiced and really creativity, curiosity at the heart of strategy for such a long time, I've spent 10 years trying to fix businesses. And I entered those words really quickly, Brian. I mean, I did, got to be smart, got to be intelligent, thoughtful. They were, and then sent it off. And started to look at that the words on the map and realized that in practice, I now have this instant response that is purely linear, rational, and is so far from what I believe as a strategist. And this has to be reflecting back at myself what I've believed now, having practiced this in trying to change businesses and having varying degrees of success. So what has it done when you're practicing it as a CEO or a change leader? Why have I become rational on this topic? I actually don't have an answer. It's very semiotically interesting for me, that as a practitioner that had to put it into play and work with teams, define strategy, have my own view of strategy, had such an instant rational response to your question. I mean, I should probably lie on a couch somewhere right now.
It's a really interesting question. And I have to say, I was wondering, as we set off answering this question at the individual level, just how much we get trapped within a dominant discourse of strategy according to mostly retired white men who've written all the books. And I just wondered, what about strategic thinking from people of color? What about strategic thinking from a feminist perspective? There must be other views that don't make it into the mainstream literature but which in practice, as practitioners, we actually know to be valuable. That I'd love to hear if anybody thinks there's a gender dimension or a diversity dimension of any kind that really matters.
Yes, I don't know whether this answers. I don't know whether it answers your question. I suppose my caveat is my world is technically change rather than strategy, although they're two sort of intertwined points. But we, so a group of mates basically came together and said, we reckon we can change fundamentally how change is constructed and how we deliver it. And we centered all of our stuff around curiosity, creativity and courage. So everything was set around those as like the three pillars. And I think the only difference I could probably call out is one, we were all women, and two, we were all of a certain age. So we were all sort of like in the early 30s camp rather than like the other camps.
What do you mean, Susie?
it's just that white middle-aged middle-class male that we casually were mentioning.
Oh, I'd long to be middle-aged. Thank you.
But we, like, how we approached it felt fundamentally different in the sector, so higher education at the time, and then out actually into delivery, because we didn't turn up with like models and methodologies, and we didn't talk, checklists and strategy. We talked people and adventure, and we saw a fundamental difference in how people engage and how people delivered and what that looked like on the other side. But I don't necessarily think it answers your question, but I think people are trying to look and think differently about this stuff.
Yeah. If I may chip in, I think there's definitely a cultural side to it. If those of us who have worked around the world, clearly the way things are done and the way people think is different from Scandinavia to India to Britain and other places. There are, you might want to say, the way of thinking, the way of doing strategy is quite different in these different places. People approach it and they bring a different a different type of thinking to the task. And the Middle East, again, there's a different style there too.
Femi, you have your hand up. Very patiently, you have the hand up. I can't see everybody's hands on the screen, by the way. So if I don't call you out, please just speak. But Femi, I can see you.
Okay. I really want to appreciate the contributions that has come on board here. And concerning the issue of strategic thinking and the aspect of diversity, how does the gender diversity, how does cultural balance within the team contribute to the critical thinking within the team? So from my own perspective, following the wide range of experience I have had, I have gotten to understand that culture has a big role to play as to how people think. For instance, in Sudan, I know that they have this cultural value that don't allow women to participate in collective discussions. And then in some other parts of the world where they believe in gender balancing and equality, you also tend to see that the tempo within such team is kind of a little bit higher than where we have just a single gender within such setup. So I think from experience where we have gender balancing within a team, there is a level of intellectual quotient that also informs strategic thinking. So that is from my own perspective.
Thank you, Femi.
Femi, can I just ask what sector do you work in? That was really interesting.
Oh, you're on mute now. And frozen, I think.
Maybe Femi, you could put it, if you can hear me, maybe you could put it in the chat.
Yeah, we can't see you at the moment, Femi. It seems to have frozen.
I think we'll definitely pick up on Femi's point when we talk about teams in a moment. Diversity among is fundamental.
Well, we probably should move on. I don't know, just very quickly, Brian and Philippa, I mean, if people wanted to develop this in themselves or others at an individual level, maybe we've got time for just, in your experience, 1 or 2 things that you could do to stretch your ability.
I think for me, at the risk of sounding like a broken record, I think it's about developing the ability to ask really good questions and really listening to the answers. And when you listen to the answers, to be curious about why people are saying what they're saying or what you're hearing, and just kind of testing out perhaps some assumptions around that. So I may sound like I've got a couple of things that are really be in my bonnet, but that's what I would say from my point of view.
Brian?
I would reiterate that, but I'll take a slightly weirder perspective on it. I think there are opportunities to practice your strategic skills all over the place. I was saying to my colleague Max yesterday, I looked at believe it or not, a crisp packet. And if you look at a crisp packet, I don't know if you've got any around, or a can of beer or something, there's heaps of information on it, right? And I started to think about what is all this information, and it's in tiny, tiny font size, and try to figure out why is it there? What's it doing there? What does that tell me about the world that we live in? What are the practices behind that? If I were in that industry, how would I respond to that? What else could that, if we took those practices across to another industry, what would that mean? And so on. So just doing thought experiments is a great way to get your thinking juices going. And another one is just arts and crafts and anything that involves skills in your hands and so on, from a cognitive point of view, the acquisition of new skills, practicing, reflecting on your successes and failures, that unlocks strategy skills in the mind. So a couple of little things that are fun to do.
And I love that you brought that in, Brian, because that takes me back, this shows how old I am, to one of Mintzberg's original articles, which was called Strategy as Craft. And it was actually illustrated with a line drawing of hands on a potter's wheel, making a pot, throwing a pot. And I've always thought about strategy as a form of craft since then. It's kind of the messy work of getting your hands in the clay actually really matters.
Yes.
Yeah. And we don't see or understand just at the brain level. You have to have your hands in it.
Brilliant. And I notice a picture behind you, Chris. You're obviously an artist as well as a great thinker. It's the ability to draw as well. And even if you're rubbish at drawing, have a go if you've got a strategy problem to draw it. Draw something about it, and that will actually, again, give you insights into it.
Well, let's move on and deal with the question of teams then. So if that's the horizon of what makes a strategic individual, we're going to go to the Mentimeter and ask what makes a team really strategic. And I'm really interested in this because I really struggle as to whether you can be strategic at that level. So I'm going to be fascinated by what people think. So could you click on the Mentimeter? It's the same link, isn't it, Rick? Same link. And there'll be a new question there, which is what makes a team strategic? And this time you get a box and you can write a sentence or a paragraph, whatever comes to you. And we'll just see what comes up on the screen. Well, I'm delighted to see that one, just from a personal perspective. That wasn't me this time.
Yes, I think you're forbidden from doing that. Actually, that multiple perspectives is an interesting one. I have something to say on that in a second.
I love that bottom left-hand box. I like the way the words are run together too. Each other's ideas, having fun, believing crazy things. It's really good. There's some good stuff coming up here.
Love the noisy debate.
Well, I suppose if it's not noisy, then it doesn't have, there's a sense that people are all just sitting there either politely sort of listening or not listening to each other, and actually not genuinely entering into conversation.
Yeah. Now, what I'm loving on here is the fact that, as you would expect, many of these comments are flatly contradictory, or at least sit uncomfortably together, which is brilliant. It's very juicy. So we have a shared sense of humour, along with, bringing in unusual voices. We have united and no sacred cows. These are difficult things. So if I was going to put one up there, I would quite like to put up the ability to hold differences like this and still be in the room creatively together.
And I think that means, question mark, in what you just said there about to bring in the different voices, Chris, is that possible within the team and still to do really good work together? And so for me, that would say, well, actually, in order for, perhaps it is that for a team to be really strategic, they actually just, first of all, need to be a high performing team, one that can genuinely listen to each other, hold different views, but still keep an eye on what they're actually meant to be doing, be able to disagree, but be able to disagree perhaps robustly, but also to then be able to come together to make a decision about what needs to happen. So as I'm seeing these lists, and as you're saying that, I was just suddenly thought, gosh, can a team only be strategic if it's actually what one would call a high performing team or a really effective team? Because actually, if you're a team that is at the kind of the level of being a working group where you're kind of listening to each other but not actually genuinely listening, you're kind of waiting the gap in the conversation.
Let me just make sure I understand that we don't get, so a high performing team is going beyond kind of just being nice then. There's something else going on.
Yeah, so if I were to think about, a team that is at either an early stage in its working together, or else perhaps has not gone through that process of really learning to work really well together, typically what we see is that people talk together, but they tend to talk more at each other rather than really genuinely together. And they also are probably less effective at thinking about things that are difficult, because actually everybody tends to be wearing their own hat of either their function, their division, their role, whatever it might be, as opposed to what is it we, the team, have to do. So what we would experience in terms of teams that are higher performing are the ones that can have those difficult conversations, yet still get to a really good place in terms of being able to do the work and make decisions. And it was just as, these, as I say, these words have been coming up and you were talking about it, it's just making me wonder about maybe a team cannot be really strategic unless it's genuinely also, perhaps not necessarily the highest performing team, but it really, is really effective as a team working together.
Brian, what do you think about that?
I think it's probably true. I think, well, it's actually probably easier to answer the question or make the point by contrasting it to what a non-strategic team is like.
Okay.
And, perhaps a non-strategic team we would recognize as a group of, I don't know, self-interested, maybe high-performing individuals, but not a high-performing team. Usually in a team that finds it difficult to develop a strategy, there's a lot of kind of, I don't know, envy in a team. In an organizational setting, there's a lot of protectionism, turf war, budget protection. These are the predominant concerns. Maybe a very, very strong attitude toward risk. Everybody's really looking at risk in a very reductive kind of way. So if all of those things are the opposite of a high-performing team, then I agree with Philippa, we have to have a high-performing team.
I see there's also some words around, unusual voices, multiple perspectives. And I think that's a really important one. Because actually, again, coming back to my point earlier about assumptions and being curious, because if we've all got the same background, then actually You know, that's quite tricky. There is an organization that I know of where the CEO is very proud of the fact that there is their exec team is very diverse in terms of gender, in terms of color, in terms of actually in some respects sexuality, in terms of disability. The one thing that they actually have overlooked is the fact that they're all highly educated and have gone through a Western education system. Many of them through, you know,
all from 3 Oxbridge colleges.
Not quite, but you know, they are all university masters and above, you know, educated. So now Patrick, I see, has put a note in the thing. The opposite is a team that is feral. That's a good word. So doesn't work together, conflict orientated, underworks work that is not required. Actually, I think that's a good opposite.
Sorry, who was that?
That was Patrick. Hello, Patrick.
I would love to. I just wonder. It makes me think. I wonder if you could have feral strategy. You know, I wonder what feral strategy might look like.
I think that might be quite interesting. Can I just say one other thing about the unusual voices, and maybe Patrick, in the meantime, could consider feral strategy and come back to us on that. I'm just thinking that if you don't have that sort of, you know, I think a chief exec or whoever is in charge of the team has, you know, sometimes you're given the people you have to work with, and sometimes perhaps it could be really useful to allocate or invite a volunteer for a role that actually helps the team become more strategic. And I'm thinking about an organization where one of the people on the exec was given the role by the chief exec of being the agent provocateur. The chief exec recognized that the executive team was actually reasonably similar in terms of background, gender, etc., etc. So he gave one of his colleagues the role of being, and it was called agent provocateur. And he said, I want you to make sure you ask the questions that none of us want to hear, which I thought was a really interesting way of actually being quite deliberate about saying, okay, recognize we don't have these different voices, and at least in our executive meetings, we need to try and bring something in.
Yeah, I also notice in that, and I don't know if that belongs here or belongs in the organization one, there's something about an assumption that the strategic thinking happens inside a strategic team. And I just think this is complete crap. You know, I think a strategic team looks outside. Strategic team's always porous, and it's looking for, you know, it's looking for connections to 1,000 places. If you're trying to make all the difference by having the 7 correct people in the room, you're stuffed. It's never going to work.
Chris, Patrick's got his hand up. Sorry, Brian.
No.
I'm not entirely sure I managed to unmute and all the rest of it.
You've unmuted, we can hear you.
Is that all right? I don't know. Hello, Philippa. Hello, all. I don't know. For me, I've never taken over a high-performing team, I don't think. I'm not aware of it. But for me, the indication has always been that teams are rather feral. And they do all kinds of weird stuff and don't work together. And Philippa has in the past helped me significantly and continues to help me with feral teams. And there is something about a common purpose. The term strategy always is rather grand for me. I'm not sure I do strategy, but rather purpose of what it is that we're doing. And that does seem to turn teams around to be able to articulate quite clearly what the direction of travel is.
I think it's a great point, Patrick, that we're together at least on what we're trying to achieve, you know, and then we can, that's a strong foundation for working things out.
Sorry, I'm just laughing because I'm just noticing Susie is going to pick up a feral toddler, which is, you know, there may be some similarities actually between feral toddlers and feral teams and feral strategies.
Yes.
Brian, sorry, please carry on.
We'll invite Susie to do a future event for us on strategic wisdom of feral toddlers. I think there's a lot to learn.
The HBR will have that. No, I think there's just a couple of other points.
Susie.
I just wanted to throw in a couple of other tips, if you like, responding to Patrick's point and the other points that have been made. Chris, your point about porous teams as well. Job rotation is a good one. Just to say, okay, let's have a deliberate policy of swapping people into different jobs. Okay, you have to take into account skills to perform those roles and so on. But if you've done someone else's job on your team for some time or been with them, you understand their position a lot more, and that builds a much stronger kind of team understanding around, as you say, Patrick, the goals we're trying to achieve. Informality, absolutely. I think that comes out in quite a few of the points here. A simple tip is make a list of strategic, big picture strategic goals, and make sure that that list is brought to the meetings of the team. Not necessarily every meeting, but sometimes a team can just get lost in the weeds, right? And we never actually remember even what are the bigger strategic things we're trying to achieve. So keep a strategy list, top 5, top 10, if you like, and bring those along. So it's, again, just some simple things that can help the team raise its strategic performance.
Philippa, anything like that from you, a sort of a tip for strategic teams?
I think it would be around again saying, are we making sure that we are looking widely enough, that we're not looking straightforward this way? And one other thing that just sort of strikes me is if you're actually talking about strategy, one of the other things I think could be really helpful and is, what do people understand by when we're talking about strategy? What do we really mean? And certainly one thing that we will quite often do with an exec team or a board is actually, first off, get them to draw a picture of strategy. Now, I have to say, you have to have some courage if you're working with a really senior exec team and you say, right, you know, you're hiring these consultants and the first thing they do is get you to draw a picture. But actually what it really articulates is, what do we mean by strategy? You know, because for some people it's a journey where we're aiming for the sort of sunny uplands, but for other people it's much more like winning a battle for resources. And you know, that's really important, because actually we might be fundamentally starting our whole conversation about the strategic issues we need to talk to with a very different mindset behind each of us, which might then lead into having very, very different assumptions about the way that we think we're talking about the same thing, but actually we're coming at it from a really different angle. And actually, interestingly, having done that exercise quite recently with an exec team, what became really clear out of the 6 of them was that one of them drew a completely different picture to everybody else. And it became really clear that that person could be really useful in helping them think strategically, because she had, if you like, a more, I don't want to say the word evolved, but a more sophisticated and completely, literally sort of almost 3-dimensional way of looking at strategy and strategic thinking. So, you know, again, find out what you've got on your team.
I'm hearing in that sort of, that particular individual drew something that was more genuinely systemic or more connected. Was that
completely? And the important thing is find out what you've got, and you know, you'll therefore find what the gaps are, and you can fill them either from externally or multiple perspectives, whatever it is, you know, because again, you'll find out if you're all thinking exactly the same way. So for example, this exec team now have the opportunity to basically use this individual to make sure they're looking completely, you know, more systemically, more holistically.
Okay, folks, time's moving on. We really should turn our attention to the third area that Brian raised for us, which is the strategic organization. And we've got another Mentimeter thing on this. Now, this time, we're giving you 2 bites at the Mentimeter. So the first thing is a forced choice. So there's a list of things, and you get to vote whether you think these things are important or not, or the most important. Afterwards, we give you an empty box to write in. So let's just see what happens. The link's in the chat again. What are the most important characteristics of a strategic organization?
Chris, you're forbidden from voting. I didn't realize you'd gone off piste earlier and put words in the chat.
I might vote several times. Who knows? Nobody's voted. Voting's happening. Right. Well, there we are. You know, as these votes are coming in, I noticed one of the things I was going to say and didn't say about strategic teams was the collaboration across silos things, because a number of times I've seen teams struggle with taking an enterprise view. You know, if you've got an exec team and the exec team is doing very little more than reporting in silos, it's so hard for them to be strategic. And this collaboration across silos matters at a team level as well, but it's coming out as top score so far on the organisation, top equal.
I think the other one is also the interesting, the one below that, listening to voices from below, because I often think that doesn't happen. Again, going back to my original gripe, if you like, that people use the word strategic to mean important and, you know, hierarchically and this type of thing. And actually, if I think about an organization we were involved in, a university actually, around really collaborating around strategy. And one of the things was, at one point in the process, every member of staff was invited to something. And in fact, of the 300 people who then came to a workshop to talk about this organization's strategy, actually 2 of them were cleaners. And the chief executive was absolutely delighted that they came, that they would actually think that, you know, they were believed that their voices were important enough to be heard, because actually they have a, you know, they represent people who, you know, are really important and may well have been with the organization for years as it changes, and have something really helpful to contribute. Now, it's not always just quite as extreme perhaps as that, but I think that can be a really useful thing.
Can I just respond to Malcolm? Malcolm Stewart just said, where does, what was it, understanding your market and customers fit in? The answer is, it doesn't fit into these. So you'll be needing the next box, which asks, so what have we missed here? Because this was literally a list that I dreamt up for Mentimeter.
So do you want to stay on this one for a moment, Chris, or do we want us to go on to the next one?
Richard, if we do the next one as well, we can't see just 2 screens coming at the same time. So we should stay on this for a bit. We'll stay on this for a bit, and then we'll fill in what we're missing. I mean, the two of you, Philippa, Brian, I mean, how do you, this strikes me as pretty damn good as a...
I think these are fascinating. I think maybe if we dig, I'm really interested often to dig in behind it and say, okay, what is the type of organization or even organizational design that facilitates collaboration across silos and enables thinking outside the existing business? If you ask yourself, not necessarily the team, but the actual design of the organization, that it would assist those things or help or hinder those things. You know, and then you start to think about information flow, knowledge sharing opportunities between divisions, between teams, even just transparency about what people around a large organization are doing. Again, back to my job rotation point, opportunities to move country, department, these types of things where it's about the organizational design and the opportunities with the organization to move things around, I think, is what makes many of these things possible or not.
And the one I'm really interested in, apart from the voices from below, is the questioning of authority, because actually, I think that is, I have seen so many really good organizations where nonetheless, that is espoused, but doesn't actually happen in practice, or happens in a very careful way in practice, shall we say, where people are encouraged to challenge, to ask difficult questions, yet actually they're quite self-censoring into the way they answer that question. So I think there's something also about being authentic, because if genuinely you're not, if genuinely the you know, you think that all the best strategic thinking can be done in the most senior exec team or whatever it is, then stick to that, you know, and do it. I think the worst thing that people can do is to encourage people, oh, please ask questions, and then actually to do nothing with it, because actually you're then I think making it worse. Femi, I see you've got your hand up.
Can I just,
sorry, Chris.
Femi, just before you speak, I just want to say one thing, Philippa. I think there's a huge connection between.
Yes, I just wanted to add a few.
Go for it, Femi.
Hello.
Go on.
Yes. Yes, please. For me, I want to add a little here because from the list we have here, the team can think beyond its existing business. Any structure you see thinking beyond their current existing business has the prospect of opening to new ideas, and then also they tend to review. They are constantly reviewing the market system. Thereby, they could explore possible this personal analysis, SWOT analysis, trying to understand the market system, and then becoming more competitive. With this idea, they can have better knowledge of what the customers or the targeted beneficiaries, what is their need, because need changes with time. So if yes, so if they think beyond their immediate business, definitely such a structure has the potential of expanding the business horizon.
Chris, can you just, I didn't catch all of that. Could you just summarize what you heard, and perhaps we could ask Femi, because it wasn't a great line to put.
I'm afraid I only heard about half of it, but it was focusing on thinking beyond the existing business. But what I couldn't hear was exactly what Femi was.
Right. Well, I could pick up the point.
Could you? Yeah.
I think it's a great point. And again, the question is how? How do you think, what is an organizational design or practice that enables thinking beyond the existing business? And again, it's this question of porousness or whatever, how do we ensure that we are open to allow new ideas to come in? How do we give people responsibility for finding them? How do we incentivize people to do that? How do we build bridges between our company, our team, either internally or externally with other teams? So it's all of those kinds of things, and not just to make that the domain of the leadership team either. I think that's very much the domain. Open strategy is very popular all over, but certainly, the middle layers of businesses is where a lot of thinking and decision making needs to happen. Otherwise, everything just floats to the top, nothing happens, or descends to the bottom into a lot of really into the weeds again. So the middle is important.
And Brian, I think there's a strong connection between listens to voices from below, and indeed not just below, but elsewhere, voices from elsewhere,
right.
And encourages questioning of authority. Because lots of organizations listen to voices from below specifically to silence them, to find out where troublemakers are.
Wow.
Yeah. You can imagine this is the Kremlin, right?
Right.
I certainly don't encourage questioning of authority, but I listen like a hawk, or watch like a hawk, for voices from below, so I can kill them. And organizations, corporate organizations, are the last bastion of the divine right of kings in many places.
Wow.
You get some of the worst power games, the worst crushing of difference in organizations.
So beware of that.
I wonder.
Sorry, Chris, can I just say, Femi, if we missed something out and you'd like to put it in the chat, it would be really helpful if you could, because we don't want to miss it.
I think we only heard half, maybe less than half. Yeah. I also recognize that people have said this isn't complete. So I'd like us to move to the second box and find out, what have we missed?
And I think, Elena, your comment of experimenting will definitely go in there as well.
Yeah. So what else? What else makes a strategic organization? If it's not one of those things, what is it?
Yes, I think that must be you, Lena, allowing for things to go wrong, make new mistakes, keep experimenting and trying. I love that word, experimenting, that sense that you can actually try something and it doesn't have to be fixed in stone. I think too many organizations tend to think about, well, once we've made a strategic decision, that's it. Going back to my point about, strategic equals big and important, because otherwise we might have to admit we were wrong.
Sid's put some things in the chat for this. Right, thank you, Sid. Flexibility. Oh, real options. Sid, are you actually able to say something about real options? Because I don't think that will be familiar to everybody.
Chris is not that familiar to me either. But can you hear me?
Yes.
Oh, great. Sorry, I'm in the kitchen. I have to make supper. My wife's just got home and she had a hard day. It's a real options reasoning is the ability to understand that, well, the way I phrased it for my company was, look, if we're not going to lose our shirt, we better just try it, because you never know. So, and I kind of walk up and down the passage shouting, if no one dies, the risk is acceptable. So, that kind of encapsulates, look, real options reasoning is a science, and there are lots of papers that have been written on it. So, but that, I think that gives you some idea of, it's got to be one's attitude to risk, and you have to learn to embrace it. Then bricolage is very much making do with what you have. And another term for that would be MacGyvering, especially, when we were hit with lockdown. Then, people learned to, I think a very simple example would be hotels started offering storage space, and working space. And then effectual thinking is an interesting one, because that is the opposite of goal-directed thinking. In other words, we go to an event with a certain goal in mind. And, if we want to build social capital, you can't have that type of goal-directed thinking. You have to have effectual thinking. I've met this person. What do they offer? What can I offer them? What does this relationship mean? And then you build your social capital with that, because obviously social capital has become incredibly important now. So those are just the three items that worked for me, and I feel came to mind, and are possibly relevant. I'm sure there are a lot more.
Thank you. That's brilliant. So Philippa, Brian, I'm conscious that we're into our last 15 minutes, so we don't have a ton of time, but I would like you to comment on what's appearing on the screen and how it fits with what you would say about strategic organizations.
Brian, I've always gone first. You go first this time.
Yeah, well, look,
being an extrovert, I always jump in, so sorry about that.
I see a lot of kind of openness, experimentation, okay to fail, freedom, that kind of thing. And what I take from that, if I sort of synthesized all those comments, is, and Sid said it as well, shake things up, right? If you're a leader, the objective in being strategic is not to create stability, total stability in the business and the organization. It's actually to create some instability. Deliberate instability, because it's only through the instability that we'll learn new things. And we do a lot of work these days with clients who are, corporate venturing, so on, is very popular, and it's popular because everybody, kind of wants to create the next great thing. But it's also a tactic for just shaking things up and bringing the new in. So again, I would say organizations that do that deliberately tend to be more strategic.
And I think on that right-hand column at the bottom, so we only see it every so often, is under the okay to fail, this idea that not just once a year, that actually being strategic, I think, is more a way of being than an activity, than a single activity. And I think it's very easy, and we see it a lot in organizations whereby, we're doing our strategy thinking, our strategy process, it's in the kind of the corporate rhythm of the annual calendar. And actually, I think for me, a strategic organization is strategic all the time. It's just part of their DNA, the way that they think, and it genuinely, it then feeds down into teams right across the organization, because it's that way of thinking is encouraged. It's okay to question what's been there for ages. Somebody on the left-hand columns put, it's okay to let existing legacy ways go. And sometimes those legacy ways that have served the organization really, really well for many years, and there may be very strong resistance to letting that go. So for me, it's very much about being strategic is just a way of being in the organization, and that the whole organization can grow as a result, because actually it becomes part of the way that we do business, that we interact with our customers. We're constantly questioning, trying things out, looking at our things, getting ideas from elsewhere, including, the healthy level of staff turnover, to just bring in, as Brian said, bring in new thinking, bring in different people.
Yeah. And leadership team turnover as well, that's key.
Yeah, there've been a couple of really good comments in the chat as we've been talking. I mean, Vanessa put in a comment about purpose as strategy, which I'd love to know more about, but I suspect we may run out of time. And Sid's comment about failing is not okay. It's just a result. It's not about being okay. So again, maybe we could have 1 minute on both of those just to give them some air. Vanessa, could you just say something about your comment?
Yeah, I think it goes back to the point that Philippa was making earlier on, that I think there's confusion even at the highest level of the organization about what is strategy, where does purpose fit with strategy. There is a challenge that many organizations have these legacy ways of working, and they're trying to work in the new ways as well. So therefore you find them buying their traditional strategies from maybe 2 or 3 big strategy houses that are the 3 to 5 year strategies, and they'll go religiously through those, because otherwise it might compromise them as individuals, because the conditions have not been prepared for new ways of working and the change. So for me, I think it's getting very overcomplicated, and in this kind of VUCA world, I don't think we can work with the slow speed of these 3 to 5 year strategies. And for me, purpose is the strategy, and what is strategic should hang off of that purpose. Right,
lovely. Thank you for the comment. I mean, I have to say, I've got a huge amount of sympathy with, strategy is not strategic planning. Some of the worst, least strategic organizations I've met spend millions on strategic planning in periodic ritual processes, but there's not an ounce of strategic thinking day to day in the organization. The two they're not the same. And unless you've got purpose at the heart of it, what are you being strategic about? Yeah.
And Chris, if I can just say, I tend to articulate the difference between purpose and strategy as being, purpose is why do we exist in the world? What would be lost if we didn't exist? It's kind of fundamental, underlying, and then strategy or strategic intent is about kind of giving us that direction in service of that purpose. But the purpose doesn't change, but the strategic intent, strategic direction might well do that.
I'd love to give a bit of airtime to Sid's comment, just because I don't quite know what Sid means, but it was really interesting. So Sid, could you pick up on the comment you put around failing, not okay, it's a result?
Yeah, sure. It relates back to the real options reasoning, where there's a cliche, sometimes you win and sometimes you learn, and once you kind of confuse your identity with the outcome of an initiative, you kind of don't want to be in that area. But we do, we like to think of ourselves as being responsible for this success or that success. So we immediately hitch our own ego to what the initiative is. But the challenge very often is being able to understand that the strategic process is a process with a combination of successes and what we would call failures,
Right.
because it's an iterative process. And as you know, there's no consensus actually to what a strategy means. I mean, I use shorthand. You know, strategy is what you need to do to win, and then I'll ask the client, well, what do you want to win at? You know, do you want more time with your family? Do you want better revenue? Do you want better profit? You know, what's winning about here? And then we'll work backwards. Yeah, I think, you know, failing. I don't really agree with the statement that, you know, failing is something that we need to do, that it's good. And it's just one of the outcomes of applying strategy, because there is no proven formula. There's nothing certain, you know, there's no equal MC squared in strategy. So you have to be comfortable with the result that you're going to get.
Yeah. Thank you, Sid.
Well said.
Folks, we're in the last few minutes. Brian and Philippa, I would like you to do exactly the same on this as you did for the other, which is to offer, if you've got a tip or two for having a more strategic organization, what would your tip be?
Seek widely to get ideas and insights, or to ask questions widely.
Mm-hmm. And I would say, a bit like Sid, do some things without a profit motive. Shake it up, throw some things around. The objective is, it may be failure, but it will also just get you out of get the organization out of this kind of rigid, inert condition.
I think if I was going to throw one in, I'd say something about the margins. Be really interested in the margins. Be really interested in the boundaries where one process hits another, one market hits another. There's usually something really interesting where things meet.
Good one.
Okay, folks, we're coming towards the end. To draw it together, I think, Brian, when we were talking, you kind of had some golden rules that you thought might form part of a summary, and I kind of like those. And you also had an idea for a couple of books that people might look at.
Absolutely.
So if I could invite you to share the rules and the books, that'd be brilliant.
Well, again, we could have probably done a Mentimeter to guess the rules, because they're probably obvious after that wonderful discussion we've just had. But I think across individual, team and organization, maybe in no particular order, 1, 2, 3 rules, a variety, or if you prefer the word diversity. As an individual, collect diversity experiences. As a team, be diverse in your composition as a team. And as an organization, make sure we're taking diverse inputs, moving people around, and we're keeping ourselves alive and fresh. The second one is maybe a little less obvious. I think balance, because yes, we need to have exposure, diversity, fresh thinking, and so on. But at the same time, it must be true to say we have to have a degree of organization, structure, allocation, right? Otherwise, it's a chaotic situation. So, but the key is to try and work out the balance between opportunity exploration and, if you like, control or structure, right? And to be continually looking at, have we got that balance right?
Lovely. Yeah.
And the third one is conversation, talk. Again, if you prefer the word communication, just have as much conversation as you can. And a lot of that conversation, make it informal as well. Agendaless meetings is another tip. Get the team together, no agenda, half an hour, let's talk. And that will actually bring a lot of strategy stuff to the surface.
Lovely. And Philippa, I will ask you the same, to say something in a moment, but could you, Brian, just share your ideas on the books?
Yeah.
And very, very briefly, why?
Yep. Can you see?
Not yet. Yes, we can.
Can you make them bigger again like you did before?
Yeah, sorry. So 2 books I found particularly helpful. learning to think strategically. As the saying goes, does what it says on the tin. A wonderful book. Julia Sloan from Columbia University has nailed it, I think, in terms of the kind of thinking processes at the individual and team level, particularly, to how do we get these kind of cognitive processes working. And there's a lot of practical stuff in there, some of which I've borrowed with pride today.
And the other one?
And the other one is Fast Strategy. Yves Dawes, I worked with in the past. He's at INSEAD. And that book, I would say, is the best book on strategy in the last 20 years in terms of putting forward a complete view of how organizations can really get their strategic performance to a higher level.
You want to eat now? Oh,
Yeah.
yes. I'm just
Okay.
closing off. I've impressed the hell out of these people. Oh, sorry.
Sorry, I don't know who that is, but
That's it.
Sid, I think,
I think it's Sid.
but we would like to pass on our best wishes to your wife for having had a horrid day.
Thank you. And she's demanding dinner, so I better just go and make this stuff. We're having ribeye steak. It's very nice because there's a lot of fat in it. It gives a lot of flavor.
You're
Anyway.
making me jealous. You're making me jealous, Sid. Have a good evening and a good day.
Well, that's the objective. That's my strategic outcome.
Philippa.
Thanks.
Philippa, maybe you could say anything you want about words of summary, but also perhaps you could help us to draw things to a close and say something about how this links to future events.
Yes, I think Brian's done a great summary there, but in terms of how, so I don't think I need to add anything to that, but in terms of how it links to what we've done is in GameShift we've decided we wanted to have you know, a year where we focused on do strategy better, the topic of, to write about it, to do some research about it, to have events such as that, and sometimes with Brian and his colleagues, which is fantastic. So if you've just signed up for this event, and you'd like to know more about and sign up for the sort of whole process, then Rick, I'm sure you can put the link to do strategy better in the chat, if that's okay. You know, in terms of do strategy better, the whole series of events and writing and thinking that we're doing around it, it is primarily aimed at those who have strategic responsibility or responsibility for strategy in an organization, or participate in strategy in an organization, or would like to be involved in strategy in an organization, like to participate in the thinking that way. It is predominantly for people with those responsibilities or interests, but others are welcome. So Rick, could you just put that in the chat, or are you? Oh, sorry, I didn't. I like how Rick's just given me a nod that says it's there. It's there. You should be looking. It's in the chat. It's in the chat already. So if you, as I say, it's primarily aimed at people who have those responsibilities and interests. So please do sign up.
And
Chris.
it's very likely that the next event will probably be around the process of doing strategy, and in particular, we've seen a lot of literature recently cropping up in the field that Brian mentioned, which is open strategy, or as Philippa and I call it, participative strategy. The taking strategy beyond the boardroom, the C-suite, the exec team, and bringing in wider groups into the strategy process. What we'd like to do is take a look at some of the new writing in that field, and also look at the writing in terms of the experience of actually doing open strategy or participative strategy. So that will probably be our next event. We haven't got a date for it yet, but we'll make sure that you all know about it, and we'd love you to come. We'd also love you to invite people you think should have been on this call. So if you can think of folks in organizations, we don't particularly want McKinsey or Pricewaterhouse on the call. We prefer to have client organizations rather than consulting organizations for obvious reasons. But you know, if you can think of people in your networks who you think definitely should be here next time, please invite them. We'd love them to come along. Meanwhile, we will write something up on the back of this, because the contributions everybody's made have been really rich. So we'll record them in some way and send them out to everybody. And then hopefully a conversation will emerge from that. So meanwhile, I just want to say thank you to Brian and the team at Effectus. Thank you to Philippa. Thank you to Rick. And
thank you
most
to
of
you.
all, thank you to everybody for coming along. And it is exactly past, and we finish on time. So we wish you a good morning, evening, night, whatever it is, wherever you are. And we'll see you next time. Thank you.
Thank
Thank
you.
you very
Bye-bye.
much. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you. Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.
Thanks, bye-bye.
Gosh, after 2 years, I'm still waving at a screen.
It's very polite. It's lovely. Wave
Right,
both hands.
stop it.
Philippa.
Been trying to
There
stop
is
you.
medication for that.
Do jazz
The
hands.
client is developing some virtual medication for people who wave at screens.
I know, I've been trying to stop now for 2 years. I just can't.
Oh, no, don't. Makes you interesting.
At least I haven't blown a kiss, which is what I did to one very surprised client.
Oh, you're lucky that's all you did. I've seen some other very drastic stuff where people had the video on.
Rick, I think you can stop the recording now. Thank you.
I think you have to stop the recording now.
Okay.